All right, Lucas. So today we're having a discussion with somebody that I've known for a while. Nathan and I first crossed paths when we were in politics. God, it has to be like almost a decade ago now. So as you and I have been talking about various things, it seemed like it would be a great discussion for us to have Nathan on the show. So Nathan, I don't know if you want to give us a quick intro to yourself so that we kind of set up the discussion we're about to have, and then yeah, let's talk about some law stuff. Let's talk about some of the interesting stuff you've run into. You've had quite some interesting things happen to you in your career, and had a chance to be a party to some really interesting cases. So we'd love to talk about some law stuff with you today.
Sure. Thanks, Grant. And I think it was 2008. I think we were delegates. It was when we were delegates to the RNC for Ron Paul in St. Paul in 2008. So that's been what now? 50, 15, long time. Um, Quite some time, 16 years. And we've kept
Yep.
in touch on and off over the years. So, yeah, I'm a lawyer in Minnesota. I have been since 2003. I started off on my own the day I could practice. I kind of started off running. I've been doing it ever since. I started off doing a hodgepodge of things and, even running around for other lawyers. One of the first things did was run around for other lawyers on criminal cases. I actually covered a criminal case for our now Attorney General, Keith Ellison, when he was running for Congress, and he wrote me a bad check, and I have the bad check hanging on the wall of my office. He wrote me a bad check for $400. So I did that, and then I when I look back on it now, I mean, well, there were parts of it that have been absolutely, I would say, terrifying. It's in some ways, and rewarding and exciting in others. Um, I've really had the opportunity to do a lot of things that I think a lot of lawyers imagine that they would want to do when they want to do it. I've because I've been on my own, I've had the freedom to and the potential detriment, of being able to do whatever I want. I mean, it cuts both ways. I mean, there's times of glory and times of great losses, and I think it's sometimes people say, from your losses come your come true knowledge. Um, I've been able to. I don't know where you want to start. There was a couple different
Well,
topics. I'm running
you gotta tell us about the Arnold Schwarzenegger thing. I mean, just to
for.
start.
Oh, I will. All right. Well, first of all, I'm running for judge now in District 10 in Minnesota for district court judge. So this is not an appellate judge or anything. This is a district court job. And it's Washington, if you're from Minnesota, Washington, Anoka, Pine, Isanti, Chisago, Kennebec, Sherburne, and Wright. Um, I'm going to be seeking the GOP endorsement. I'm working on that now. And so I have the party faithful to support me because I think that that's probably how I could win the race. And actually, there's a history in Minnesota about judicial elections. I can probably touch upon a little bit too, but I did mention when we were saying I did have a case where Arnold Schwarzenegger wrote an amicus brief against me. I was local counsel in a case in 2020 entitled Carson v. Simon. So I wasn't the main lawyer on it, but I was the local counsel for Minnesota. And that case was about there was a consent decree that allowed mail-in ballots to be accepted past the election date, and that had been approved. The first, these parties, which are suspected to be partisan people, I think it wouldn't be controversial to say that Democrat partisans, they really what they did was change election laws, change statutory law by saying that there was a virus. So they needed to change all these laws, and they did it around the country. It was a nationwide campaign. And so first they went to federal court, and then the federal court judge, who I think was a Trump appointee, it doesn't really matter, but the federal judge, I think, kind of sniffed out what they were doing and didn't allow them to do it. Then they went to state court in Ramsey County in Minnesota, and they got this consent decree that said that changed the election law in Minnesota. They got it from a judge who was, in that case, Amy Klobuchar's former field staffer, and she was now a judge. And so she got that consent decree. So what this Carson v. Simon case was a collateral attack in federal court on that consent decree. The two plaintiffs were Jim Carson and Eric Lucero. Eric Lucero is now a senator from Wright County. Jim Carson is a longtime GOP activist in Congressional District 4. their standing in the case was that they were presidential electors, so that they had standing to bring this suit. That case was decided on summary judgment at the district court level before Judge Brazel, then a former Hennepin County judge who was then an Article III federal judge. And then it was appealed to the Eighth Circuit Court of Appeals. And this is where this is a circuit court, the federal circuit court. There's circuit courts around the country. And they're the courts right below the Supreme Court. And in this case, you get a panel, and this was handled by these absolute expert lawyers. I don't have their name out of old friend of mine is a partner at the firm, and that's how the case came to me. They said, "Can you find an elector?" I said, "You bet I can." And then they let me be local counsel on the case, which which was really a cool opportunity. I mean, their level in this appellate stuff is just far, far. I mean, it is just the fantastic lawyers that they had on this case. I mean, far above anything I could do. So I was just local counsel and keeping an eye on it, and general whatever assistance I could offer. And so the people could file, and it went up to the Eighth Circuit Court of Appeals. And these are on quick tracks. So this is right around the election time in October. So these things are going on real fast tracks.
Was this
Usually,
this was the Trump election time? So is
yep,
that what?
this was Trump election time. Yep. And so usually oftentimes these district court cases can go on for a long time and years in appeals. This is rocket docket. This stuff was moving real quick, and it went up to the Eighth Circuit to a panel to the Eighth Circuit Court of Appeals. Now, in that case, people, they could ask permission to the court to file amicus briefs, which is friend of the court. I mean, amicus curiae means friend of the court. And in that case, an amicus curiae tries to, guide the court on what they, view the law to be. In this case, on the other side against us, Arnold Schwarzenegger, in his individual capacity, hired a law firm to write a brief against us. And we ultimately prevailed in that case. Carson v. Simon is a published case, and that was a big case. I actually had a lawsuit in something completely unrelated to election stuff. And I was looking at a memo the other day, and I was like, well, look at that. Somebody's citing Carson v. Simon for some proposition. So I got to, but that's something that if I worked for a big firm or something, or any type of firm, I probably wouldn't have been able to do that. But I was able to say, yeah, I just want to do that. I can go find your guy right now. And I had the flexibility to do that. I also had a lockdown case. And then I saw you brought jury nullification up on the screen. I can talk about that too. Whatever you guys want to talk about next.
Before we go to that, why did Arnold Schwarzenegger was the governor of California, not in the Eighth Circuit, doesn't share the Eighth Circuit? Why did he feel the need to file an amicus brief?
It's a good question. I don't know. If I were to just speculate about it, he's connected with a group of people that probably put him up to it, and they probably wanted to use his celebrity to maybe get more attention for their brief, whether it be Joe Schmo from California, Arnold Schwarzenegger, and it's probably a little bit more they thought somebody might pay attention to. That's my guess. I don't know the particular reason. I was certainly surprised.
They should have gone for Mark Hamill, but maybe they would.
Yeah, right.
But anyway, yeah, the jury nullification, and also I think very interesting. Your Grant sent me a message yesterday that with the Larvita McFarquhar. Let's talk about Larvita McFarquhar. I think maybe it was around the same time, possibly. Yeah, well, it would have had to have been about the same time as this 2020 fight over election law. What can you tell us about that case? I know very little. I just read a couple of news items that I Googled about it.
So we had in Minnesota, like a lot of the other states, we had really hard, strong lockdowns here during the COVID time, and they shut down everything, and they shut down bars and restaurants and everything. And because I am one of these independent people that does stuff, these things get floated by me over time. But I'm not somebody that I don't usually take something. I won't take something if there's absolutely no point at all to it. There has to be some sort of point, or if I don't think that there's a strong legal basis for it. So I just want to premise that I've always said that no matter what, I try to act in the realm of the possible. I mean, I'm not a sovereign citizen person or anything like that. I've always tried to act within the realm of the possible. And so, and I always wanted to have some sort of point to my litigation, some strong argument about it. So when these were going on, when the lockdowns were going on, there were a lot of offensive cases, right? Remember people suing and it would get dismissed, and suing and it would get dismissed. And the Larvita is somebody who was a gal who, Larvita McFarquhar, she lived in around Marshall in a small town out
I think I've got the right one on the screen, right? That's what we're talking about?
Yeah, this is her right there. Yeah. And so she kept her bar open, and then people go there, and she was, like an activist, and keeping this bar open, and she raised some money online, so she had some money to pay an attorney and stuff. So they wouldn't really cite her out there, but she got sued by the Minnesota Department of Health. Now, it's kind of a side issue, just as the government will just pick out the battles that it wants, right? So when all this lockdowns was going on, I noticed that the the casino, that the bars and restaurants on tribal lands were open. Now, the first thing everybody says to me when I say that is they say those are sovereign nations. Those are sovereign nations. Now, if anybody takes some time to look in the history of U.S. and Indian relations, and frankly, I'm sympathetic and I'm and sensitive to the subject. I mean, but you have to really understand the history before you say that, and say that, yeah, they're sovereign nations and they can do what they want. If you looked into Indian history, there you would understand that there's no way that the people who drove these people off their land and took the land and did this stuff with treaties and put them on reservations, that they would say, you know what, we're going to put you on reservations and you guys can do whatever the hell you want. Now, really, do you honestly think that that's how they made the law? It's not. So I looked at this and I said, they sued her with a civil complaint, and I made an equal protection argument. And I said, we're entitled to equal protection of the laws. And so Walz, because he's all tied in with the tribes through his lieutenant governor, I guess, if I were to speculate, he left the bars and restaurants on tribal properties open. And so everything else in the state is closed, and you go down to Mystic Lake and order a steak, which is the Shakopee Metawakanton Sioux, which is, I think, now the wealthiest Indian tribe. It's not the wealthy. If it's not the wealthiest, it's the second wealthiest Indian tribe in the country. These are very influential political entities in the state of Minnesota. Very, very influential, much more than people know. And he kept all these open. And so everybody says, oh, they would just ignore this argument. And then everybody would say, online, people would say, that's a tribal entity. They can do what they want. Well, that's not true. It's not true. And I can cite the law for it. There's a law. I think it's 25 USC 231. That exactly in enforcement of state laws affecting this, for school attendance and for the purposes of making inspection and educational institutions and enforcing sanitation and quarantine regulations. The states are explicitly allowed to do this. In addition to that, there's a Minnesota statute.
Do I have the right one on there? I tried to grab
25 USC 231, not 31.
231. Okay.
Yeah. 25 USC 231. And so it was explicitly contemplated that if there was some sort of quarantine regulations or something needed to be applied to Indian reservations, there it is right there. There's the law. There's the law. and they would just not ever have any response to this. In addition to that, the other statute, I don't have it in front of me. It doesn't matter.
Well, Walls didn't care about any existing
No,
laws because we
they
had the
didn't.
mask mandate, and like you're not supposed to have your face covered up either, and they just flouted that and didn't care
Yep,
about that
that was
either.
another thing where it was a criminal law. It was a criminal. Yeah, it's a criminal statute, and there were reasons for that. We have mass people committing crimes now. But that aside, there was also a Minnesota state law that was basically the companion of this that said that they can enter onto tribal lands and do this stuff. So the idea that they didn't have the power to do it on the Indian lands is false. False. So then we have then they say there's this virus that's killing everybody and we have to shut everything down, but we're going to leave these massive operations opened on tribal lands. We know that there's something up when they do that. So I pled this as a defense. And I said to other people, because, there were other lawyers I would talk to. I've met some other really cool lawyers working on this. And one of them was my friend Sam Deal with Cross Castle. He's a great lawyer. And so we said, well, there's an equal protection argument here. What's going on with this? I pled that in the answer that you can't just not close. You can't close down restaurants on everywhere else and down the road. Right from Larvitas, you could go to Lower Red Lake Reservation, probably an hour, 2-hour drive, and there's a restaurant open there. So how could this possibly be about a virus when you're doing this? Obviously, this was obvious. It can't be anything but a political decision that was made. So I pled this as a defense. And as opposed to the people who would bring these lawsuits and face an immediate, what we call it, a 12B6 motion to dismiss just as a matter of law, they wouldn't get into any discovery. Well, I pled in an answer and had a defense, and I could get some discovery. So that discovery means you can ask questions to the other side. You can take depositions. And in that case, we got a deposition. And in this case, there was my other people became interested in it. I'll hit that in a minute. We got a deposition of a guy named Richard Danila, who was the chief deputy epidemiologist for the state of Minnesota. The main guy, what you would think this would be one of the absolute main people that knew all kinds of things. Well, my friend Sam Deal, at that point, there were other people that were assisting with funding, and they said, well, we'd like Sam to take the deposition. And I said, that is fine with me. I don't have any ego about it. Sam takes a great deposition. And in addition to that, when I got that deposition, Larvita was involved with all kinds of activists. And I got a call from RFK Jr. I had like 2 long calls with RFK Jr. about my deposition and the types of questions we could ask. And I have to tell you, some of the politics of his aside, RFK Jr. is a really nice guy, and he's a really good lawyer. He is a smart lawyer. Talking to him, lawyer to lawyer, about a case, he really knows what he's talking about. He's really litigated stuff. And he had some, it's been a couple years since I had this conversation. I think I still have his cell phone number. But he had points and things to ask and some helpful tips that he wanted to offer. He was very gracious. He was very nice. And he called me. He was very interested in this. This is the only case in the United States where anybody's gotten any discovery. So then we have it on video. Sam Deal conducts over video deposition, and I watch over video, and I have the recordings of it somewhere. Sam deposes Richard Danila for 7 hours, which I think is the maximum you can do. And if you think of that Sergeant Schultz in Hogan's Heroes, where he says, I know nothing. This is Richard Danila. This is the main guy. What I took away from watching those 7 hours of depositions is that this guy wasn't making any decisions. He wasn't aware of how any decisions were made. And there wasn't any scientific basis for any of these decisions. He never had clear answers for any of this stuff. It was all nonsense. And obviously, it appeared to me they were getting instructions from other places. And actually, at the same time, contemporaneous with this, or around that time, and it kind of goes off on the tangent of the law matter, I made a Data Practices Act request. I think either I made it or I helped Mary Franson make it. I think I drafted it to the and this would be down you guys's territory for the there was a model, a software model that said that they predicated all these lockdowns upon. Well, I after a long, long battle, I guess this was past this. I finally got the source code for it, and I showed it to Grant, and Grant is like an expert programmer, and I mean, he was like, "This is nonsense," and it's not very well programmed. But that's
I remember that. That was a
yeah,
lot of fun.
yeah, and so I've also been able to make data requests over the years. I've done all kinds of stuff. So yeah, I got that call, and then we ended up losing because it's political. I mean, they just end up just kind of denying all these things, and I think ultimately they had to admit they had the power to do it, but to shut them down, but they just didn't, decided they weren't going to, or they just, you know, really the law is kind of just an exertion of power. There hasn't been a real faithful, you know, adherence to the law in Minnesota, and I think even if people don't like it, I mean, I guess they should follow it. I mean, that's what they try to tell people in juries. Which maybe if you guys want to go into jury nullification, I
Well,
think that would.
before we go there, very interesting. I always find arguments, especially legal arguments, concerning or in which I don't know, tribal lands. Mean, very amazing. That I'm always thinking about who owns land, or who controls land, who controls property. I live or I have property, or I have a house. I'll put it that way. I have a house in Western Colorado in which there is an impending executive order to convert it into a national monument, which I find it very interesting. I don't know if you're familiar with the Bears Ear fight over in Utah, but McGirt v. Oklahoma. Are you familiar with McGirt v. Oklahoma?
Yeah, generally, where they expanded this tribal jurisdiction over a whole bunch of different things.
Well, and there's also, I mean, yesterday we actually were talking a little bit. We touched on the 14th Amendment, 1866, and how it notably excluded Native Americans when it expanded citizenship to formerly enslaved persons, and how that was also withheld until Dawes Act of 1907. I think, and I live in Oklahoma, or I grew up in Oklahoma, the Panhandle of Oklahoma, and in New Mexico. How I live in New Mexico now. Both have several reservations. Oklahoma was an Indian territory. But also interesting again to have these like words that we have used in the past: territory, property, land. I don't know. When McGirt v. Oklahoma came out, I thought it very interesting because there seemed to be this long detente or fight. People talk about the parties switching parties. How do we get more parties in our federal system? And I thought that the Cherokee are supposed to have a representative seated in Congress. And if it is true that the tribal lands are given sovereignty from the state in which they reside, and we've come to a place in which also the native peoples are given citizenship to the United States, maybe it stand to reason that more of them would be seeking federal representation. So I've wondered if we would see more of a shift in that direction. But even since McGirt v. Oklahoma, which I think was 2015, we still haven't seen the Cherokee representative seated in Congress.
I'm not aware of that treaty, but that would certainly be interesting. I mean, the Indians, it's really a mixed bag with the Indian things, and of course with Oklahoma, I mean that was where it was one of the last places to become a state, and it's where they drove a lot of Indians from other places. They drove them from the south up there, and they just used that as kind of a place to corral a whole bunch of Native Americans. I mean, hence you have a very strong Native American presence in Oklahoma. It's a mixed bag, and I mean, in Minnesota, they've joined the gang of I would say the tribes at least have joined the gang of the Democrats here. But I think that they give money to both sides. They're very influential. They're real rich tribes. And then when you look at and I know that when you look into it, some of the tribes are real generous. I mean, Shakopee is generous with I think other tribes and provides loans and assistance and so forth. But you look at Pine Ridge; those people on Pine Ridge are relatives, are not that far off in relation to the Shakopee, who were the loyal Sioux I mean, those are Sioux people as well, who were the loyal Sioux who were left there. But I
So
guess
Nathan, real quick, let's go back to faithful adherence to the law. I know that this is one that you worked on quite a bit about. Minnesota has a statute that says you can't conceal your identity, but at the same time, there was a mandate that you had to, cover your face in certain circumstances. Can you talk a little bit about what
here,
happened with?
here's my view of this. I mean, I was opposed to this masking and stuff, and then some guy I at a student or a school board meeting, some guy reported me to the lawyers board for being opposed to masking. Well, the lawyers board dismissed it, but it was just a way to harass me. I mean, these people are Bolsheviks who are just trying to, harm people however they can. I mean, frankly, I wouldn't. There's a lot of people I don't like in the world. I wouldn't really be interested in going after their profession and their ability to make a living to harm them, even people I gravely dislike. I think that that's a real shitty thing to do, frankly. Anyways, this concealing identity, you've got the statute up here, 609735. This was originally created, I guess the history of it I saw in Minnesota was for the, the Ku Klux Klan to not wear masks and stuff. And then I think otherwise just to generally combat crime. But I guess this is from 63. But it was to combat crime. Now here's my view of this statute. They would tell us that the mask is a medical thing and it's provided for a medical reason. Okay, so presumably it's a medical treatment. And so here it says concealing identity. A person whose identity is concealed by the person in a public place by means of a robe, a mask, or other disguise, unless based on religious beliefs or incidental to amusement, entertainment, protection from weather, or medical treatment, is guilty of a misdemeanor. So that medical treatment line, at least for these purposes, I think needs to be looked at. Because if it's a medical treatment that 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 everybody needs to take. We're going to order the medical treatment of wearing a mask to everybody. You would think that a medical treatment, I don't know of any other medical treatment besides maybe fluoride in the water. That's a whole other conversation, or that they mandate to people. That is mandated, just mandated to everybody without any consideration to their underlying medical conditions at all. I mean, that to have a blanket mandate like that. So when people say you have to because of the pandemic and it's a medical treatment, all right, if it's a medical treatment, you're right. Where's the prescription for it? If you have to, if my view is if you're wearing a mask around in public, you better have a prescription from your doctor or a doctor's note that says you can wear that. Now, that and this dovetails
Because otherwise you're guilty of a misdemeanor.
Yeah, you're guilty of a misdemeanor, which is
Right.
Which is up to 90 days in jail and $1,000 fine in Minnesota. And now we've sort of, after several years after they started doing this, I was seeing at the time people are going to use this to commit crimes, and I think around the country, I don't think it's subject to reasonable dispute that there are groups of people who take advantage of wearing these masks to further criminal activities. I mean, and that was traditionally what this was based upon. That if people are going around wearing a mask, maybe they're involved in some sort of criminal activity. It's a suspicious thing to do. And this dovetails into another thing that it's a problem. I kind of have a solution to it, or at least a proposed solution to it that I think would somewhat solve it. There's a lot of things that are written down in laws that are just sort of like guidance to people who are running the government. Like the last thing we just talked about was you can close down these things on Indian reservations. Well, they didn't. They just decided they weren't going to do that. That was a political decision. There's also a statute, I don't know the name of it in front of me, in Minnesota that said that chiropractors can issue doctor's notes. And I know that there were edicts from one of our major healthcare systems because a doctor leaked it to me. I'm not going to name healthcare system, but it's a major Minnesota healthcare system, to never issue any medical exemptions for masks. The person showed me the emails. I have the emails. It was a doctor who left one of them. She's and perfectly credible, sent them to me. There was a universal, one of the medical systems said you can never give ever anybody an exemption to the mask thing. Well, there's a provision in the Minnesota statute that says that chiropractors can give doctor's notes for school. Okay. So I think some chiropractors, I'm hearing that, I recall this only anecdotally, but some chiropractors were issuing exemptions for masks. Well, there's in the statute, it says that, to school administrators, this is like school law, that chiropractors can give notes. Well, school officials just decided that they were just not going to follow that law. That they just thought, well, we're just not following that right now. We're just not following that law. Well, the laws were written with the expectation that honest people who took an oath of office to follow the laws and the Constitution would follow the laws and the Constitution. And they just decided they just weren't going to do that anymore unilaterally. And then people would say, well, that's what the law says. That's what the law says. And they're not wrong. The problem is there's no private remedy to enforce that. If somebody tries to bring a lawsuit about that, when people would bring these types of lawsuits about that, the courts would say, well, there's no private cause of action for that. The law says they have to do that, but there's no private cause of action for that. You can't sue about it. They're just supposed to do it. It just sort of hangs out there in the ether. Well, I've thought, and I think there's a provision in the Minnesota Constitution, I don't have it in front of me, that every private right should have a remedy. And what I've thought is there's a federal statute under which people sue for rights, which is Section 1983 action. I think it's 42 USC 1983. And that was a Civil War law, I think it was a Reconstruction era law about civil action for deprivation of rights. And that's where people sue federally. They sue state entities and government entities for that, for deprivation of rights. And what I thought we should have in Minnesota is a statute, a Minnesota, and states could have this, a statutory equivalent of 42 USC 1983. That is, if you're not following the statute or something, we should be able to privately enforce it, and there should be some remedy against that. Some remedy against you for just saying, well, I'm not going to follow the statute. And but we don't have that in Minnesota. But I mean, I think that that's something that states should consider, because I don't think that the people that founded this country or the people that wrote the laws ever anticipated that there would be these sort of blanket views of, well, we're just going to pick and choose the laws that we're going to follow.
Yeah. Where if we have elected officials that just decide on a whim, that's what the law says, but we're just not going to do it. We don't care. Doesn't matter.
At least I think when they were dealing with the Indians, they would ignore the treaties and then pass some law circumventing them. That was kind of the pattern there.
I mean, I think this might be a good segue into jury nullification.
Yeah, this is great. Let's go to jury nullification.
Well, but before, I mean, maybe in a step to that, Texas with their abortion law, like, I think what you're getting at here and even with what we're seeing with the growth of the people recognizing the term lawfare, for my friends, everything, for my enemies, the law. It's an uncomfortable notion in a nation that was dedicated to notions of liberty and seeking freedom, that we have a justice system in which people get to, legislatures write something down, but then there is someone who's picking and choosing. When Texas came out with their abortion law and it deputized citizens to sue anyone, it gave everybody standing. I thought that was a new era of law in the United States, and I guess it also brings up this concept of juries. We used to have jury trials all the time. Again, I'm in New Mexico, or part of the time I live in New Mexico. Jury nullifications were commonplace, and I mean, a Methodist minister named O.P. McMains was certainly murdered a couple of people in New Mexico, and the jury found him guilty, but they forgot to write down the sentence. And the judge, clapped his hands after the trial and said, "Well, guess you're free to go." So, our concepts of justice and punishment have changed a lot, but jury nullification seems to me to be integral to the original concept of justice in America. So, very interesting your case in which a juror. Tell us about
Let
that.
me let me backtrack a little bit on the juror. I mean, on the jury nullification thing, and give you some history for it, and then I'll talk about the more recent thing. Because I actually, because I've been able to be on my own and do these things, I have I represented a guy named Alvin Schlangen in around 2012 in a series of raw milk charges in the city of Minneapolis, and he was acquitted. I had Amish people come and testify, and he was acquitted. Actually, the guy who ended up presiding over, he was over the Chauvin case in a hallway. I remember him laughing at me for going to trial on this because he was on the case for a little bit, and he said, "What? So people can be found guilty?" I said, "Well, I'm just going to try the case." Because I'm forgetting his name right now, but he's the judge on the. And I ended up having a different judge, actually a very good judge who was a longtime prosecutor named Robert Small. He was a longtime federal prosecutor. And I would say in terms of fairness in handling the case, the guy, and I knew his son, who was also a prosecutor, but I would say he was a fair judge. And we had, and he's retired now. But every day the courtroom was filled with very well-behaved kids. And it was just a whole show for 5 days. And Alvin Schlangen was acquitted, and I think he was functionally guilty. And another Hennepin County judge, I'm not going to name him on this, but because this story is told to me anecdotally, but I think it's a true story based upon what he told me, and then based upon my interactions with this judge later on. Another Hennepin County judge who was not a judge on my case, so I think it's still on the bench. If he did, he gave a speech at. He gave a speech at somewhere, and he said, I think he said the only there's the story right there. He said the only effective and successful use of jury nullification and application of it in Minnesota that I know of in my time was done with in the Alvin Schlangen case with my Nathan Hansen, and he was acquitted. And then they charged him again in Stearns County, and I lost that one. But then the judge sentenced him to a petty misdemeanor, which is like a parking ticket, and then that was the end of it. And then they stopped prosecuting Alvin Schlangen. And to my knowledge, I think people can generally get there's a whole body of law about that. They can you can sell your wares from a farm itself, and then the question became, how much you can do. Could you share a cow and pick it up from these Amish people, and is that wares from the farm? And that it had dealt with a provision of the Minnesota Constitution, which actually, if we're going to talk about this is actually important to talk about that, because I think it goes to jury instructions. You mentioned something with a sentence in New Mexico. We don't have that way in Minnesota. In Minnesota, the judge does the sentencing and the jury does the decision of guilt or not guilty. And the jury is given instructions. Now, we have by the judge, and the judge has what you can have anything for jury instructions. We have books that are jury instruction guides for civil and criminal, but those are just guides. And some of them are problematic, and really how some of them are problematic is really an academic discussion for another day. But in general, you can have anything in there. And I think in Raw Milk 2, we had these things about egg temperatures. There's no jury instruction on egg temperatures, so we had to take something from the statute and build that. And I think in Raw Milk 1 and Raw Milk 2, we had the provision of the Minnesota Constitution that says that people can sell their products of their farm from their farm. So you can instruct the jury on that. And what they don't allow, and I've tried over the years, maybe it's just because I have a smart ass, to put a jury instruction in there. I should see if I could find it. It's a pretty funny one. Um, I'll run a search for it while I'm talking, and I'll keep talking. Um, the the judge, so the judge gives jury instructions and instructs the jury, and the where was I going to go next? So they'll be real adamant about you not telling the jury that they can acquit or that they can acquit.
You were talking about jury instructions and sentencing and sort of how that was all constructed in Minnesota. I think if we're trying to get back on that train.
Here's one instruction that I was always try to offer. You can offer proposed instructions. So you offer proposed instructions. Like here's one that I've offered over the years as a defendant. And I never get, the judges will never grant me this one, but I've attempted it many times. Duty of a jury. As jurors, you may find anyone not guilty for any reason. This is not a rule of law, but an inherent power. You cannot be punished or otherwise called to answer for your verdict in the private exercise of your conscience. Here's a police testimony I've put in. I'll leave that one out. That one's a little too on the chin. So that's a jury instruction I've offered. Now, there's a case that came to me recently that I ended up representing the guy on, that was a friend of my uncle, a very elderly man up north. I'm going to try not to attach names out of respect to the people that it was handled in the way I wanted it to be handled, that I imagined it should be handled, even though a lot of people had, it could have been litigated like crazy. So I'm going to respect the names of some of the other people. I don't want to, call anybody out, even though these things it is a public case. So a call came to me. So my mom's brother, my uncle, lives up north, and he had this friend who was charged with criminal contempt. And this guy was charged in criminal contempt in this county. It says, and I've got the complaint in front of me, it says he engaged in willful disobedience to the lawful process or other mandate of a court. And it goes on to say that a jury trial regarding this case commenced in Atocta County, in Itasca County. She asked them questions about their qualifications. And then she asked, I'm reading from the criminal complaint, and I'm not, is there anything about the nature of the charges in this case which causes you to have some doubt as to whether or not you could give both sides a fair and impartial trial? Do you understand that if selected as a juror, each of you must decide this case solely on the evidence produced in court and the law as I give it to you, and not on the basis of bias, passion, prejudice, or sympathy? Do you understand that you must follow the law as I give it to you, even though you think the law is or should be different? And so she asked him these questions, and this guy said that he could be fair, and it was a gun charge. And then he just refused to convict, and he hung the jury. And he just says, this is, BS. I don't think you should be convicted of a gun charge. And the jury, I'm reading toward the end of it. This isn't a criminal complaint, by the way, I'm reading, that's public. The jury resumed deliberations. During deliberations, the foreperson wrote the following note: we are unable to convince the juror to follow the judge's instructions and come up with a verdict on either count. Even though we all agree on the facts of this case, the juror is unwilling to vote guilty on either count, even though he did admit the defendant was in possession of a firearm and did not have a permit. He also stated that he did not harm anyone, so he was not guilty of doing anything wrong. He is unwilling to change the vote on the verdict, even though he stipulated that the facts proved his guilt. He is only concerned with what happened to the defendant if he is found guilty of the crimes he admitted he did, because the law is wrong. This has escalated to verbal insults and verbal threats. And
I can only imagine what they're describing in that room.
This guy is, it's exactly as you would imagine. A great guy, by the way. So he gets this criminal charge, and this wasn't that long ago. This was in March of last year. So my mom is also an attorney, but doesn't really do this stuff area. My mom knows I know a lot of there's people that I know that are smarter than I am about criminal law. I mean, I'm a pretty good trial lawyer, but there's some people I know who are real smart. And then, so my mom was really offended, and she said, "Well, I'm really offended by this." And she's like, "You and your friends should probably just try to figure this out." So I got in touch with the prosecutor. I kind of knew who the prosecutor was. I'm not going to really go into that because I don't want to dox him, but it's his dad, who was a real famous guy. His dad's cousin had been a great mentor to me. Long time ago, died 20 years ago now when I worked at the state. So I knew generally people from his family. And I said, let me talk to you about this. So I actually found the case here. And as you guys asked this question about jury nullification, I had to do a friend of mine did some legal research, and I did too, to tell this prosecutor that you can't charge this juror for refusing to convict. It's not a crime. It's not criminal contempt for refusing to convict. And he's like, "Well, I'm not aware of any case law on that." Well, I provided him the case law. So I pulled up the email here. I remembered his name, and I'm going to read the case. You might be able to pull it up on your screen there.
Okay, I'll try
But
to do that.
it's State v. Hooks, 752 NW2D 79. And NW2D means Northwest Second. That's how that came from, is another story. But I'll read from this case about jury nullification. And then you wonder, if somebody were to give a jury nullification instruction, if they would just use this case, if it was good law. If you could write it right in the jury instructions. There's the case right there. Jury nullification, also called jury lenity, is an extraordinary power of the jury to issue a not guilty verdict, even if the law as applied to the proven facts establishes that the defendant is guilty. And here it cites to a case called State v. Perkins. Jury nullification is a curious paradox. It is the jury's prerogative to disregard the law without actually committing an unlawful offense in doing so. Its exercise is literally illegitimate, contrary to law, but practically legitimate, allowed by law. It is the physical power to disregard the law that has been laid down to the jury by the court. And then it cites another case. In that sense, the most accurate description of the jury's paradoxical authority to act on its own in disregard of the law, even when it is charged with following the law, is the raw power to bring in a verdict of acquittal in the teeth of the law and the facts. And then it goes on to discuss a Minnesota Supreme Court case, which is State v. Perkins, 353 Northwest 2nd, 557, in Minnesota, 1984. So the law is in Minnesota that people can do it, but they're real loath to ever allow anybody to instruct the jury on that. I can't say, if somebody asked me about it, on one thing, as a judicial candidate, you can't ever say how you would rule on anything. But it would be interesting if somebody were to say, well, here's a proposed jury instruction that is based upon this Minnesota Supreme Court case, State v. Perkins, on how a jury can look at stuff. And it would be hard to say no, because that's a published case. That's a Minnesota Supreme Court case is binding precedent, and that is the law of the state of Minnesota, provided it hasn't been overturned by some sort of other federal subsequent authority, the Supreme Court, or perhaps in a subsequent case by the Minnesota Supreme Court, or by statute. I guess that's another way that a case could be overturned. But it would be interesting to see that. So we do have it here, but it's heavily suppressed, and they don't really want to tell people about it. And they don't really want juries doing that. It's hard to legitimately say.
But you got a case, but you were working on a case where this essentially came up because somebody was charged for vacating.
That's the complaint I just read to you. And that case, I'm reading from an email I sent to that prosecutor quoting it. And then he called me back and he said, "You are correct." And he dismissed the case, because I had friends who were like, "Let me at him." I had a very prominent attorney call me and say, "Nate, if this case goes on," he's like, "I want it." And I would say he's probably a top 5 criminal trial attorney that we have in Minnesota now. This guy, he's a friend of mine, and he was like, if this goes to, he goes, I want a piece of this. He goes, I want to do this case with you if it goes to trial. And I said, well, I'm going to use the soft touch with the prosecutor first. I'm not going to call yelling at him. I'm just going to try to show him what this case is and what this law is, and that, you know, this is not, not a battle to pick here. And he agreed with me. He agreed with me, and after I sent him this email and I had a brief conversation with him, he said, I'm going to dismiss the case. And he dismissed the case. And my client thought it was miraculous. I handled it pro bono, and he sent me a gift. I won't say what it was, but it was a pretty cool gift as a thank you for getting him acquitted or getting his charge dismissed. He was real scared as he was 83 years old. I mean, he was not of any particular great means. They wanted him to do a Zoom appearance. I mean, he didn't know how to handle it. And he was scared. I mean, he just served on a jury and thought that he was doing what he thought was right, and it turned out he was. I mean, they can get real mad about it all they want, but that's what happened.
Well, was there any discipline to the prosecutor? Like, well and good that he dropped this, but he caused grief to one of the citizens who was exercising his rights, his duty as a juror.
This is it's an interesting question, and I have to tell you that this is, conversations were had. The problem, I mean, the issue becomes a practical one, or I said I try to deal in the realm of the practical. First of all, prosecutors are real immune. So let me just talk about this, what you're saying here generally. Prosecutors, to bring charges, I don't have the case in front of me, but to bring whatever charges they want and do whatever they want to do, they have broad immunity. As far as a mistake about the law here, I don't think it's any type of professional thing. The guy, this prosecutor who brought this charge, as wrong as it is, he genuinely, honestly believed that he had a correct interpretation of the law here. Now, the judge who signed the complaint, also immune. So the prosecutor immune. And this was a discussion that was had. So it's interesting you asked the question, because it does raise the question. So judge is immune, prosecutor is immune. The only person that might be exposed, because immunity kind of goes away as you go downhill, depending on who you talk to, depending on, what their station is and what you're talking about. A person that would be exposed to potential liability here would be the cop who signed off on if any at all, would be the cop who signed the complaint.
I thought police officers had almost, like blanket immunity too, don't they? Or you're saying they don't?
They have pretty strong immunity, but it's not as strong as a prosecutor or a judge.
I see. So it's like judges and prosecutors are like they have like the armor of God, but like the police officers, there's chinks in the armor.
That's right. That's exactly correct. And so, yeah, I thought about this, but the whole point of this is if you get involved and start picking a big fight like this, and this talking from a guy who's been involved in a lot of big fights, I got this done in a way that it just needed to get done. And I got it done quickly. And it really wasn't worth, if I get in that kind of stuff, I could get involved in something that could go on for years.
Yeah, I hear you on that, because like some battles are not worth fighting. It's like what really needed to happen here. You got this old guy that's kind of gotten caught up in something that he didn't intend to, for going with his conscience, and like what you did was sort of get him out of that situation. It's an expedient, practical thing versus fighting an ideological battle that goes on for years, where nothing is likely to get done except for wasting a lot of time and money.
And I didn't approach it. The immediate, it's hard to quell your psychic turmoil when you see something like this, right? It's outrageous. And, I mean, there's no doubt about it. I mean, I was outraged, and I think I gotta pull it up. I got their restitution request. I scanned it in. The state filed a restitution request. What was the guy's name?
Tell us what that means. What's a restitution request? Like,
So the state wanted money for I got to look up the guy's case here because I know I saved it because I was like, this is too funny not to save. I got it scanned in here. The restitution is you compensate the crime victim for the amount of money that they're out for whatever happened to them. That's what restitution is. And so the state filed. I remember laughing for days and sending this to my friends. And I didn't repeat what I was going to say is my friends. I mean, some of my friends that I talked to about this, one of them really, my smartest friends, smart guys smarter than me, outraged about this. And I couldn't, it's not helpful to my client to call this guy and start yelling at him. I mean, the guy's just going to button up then, and he's not going to do a damn thing to help me to get rid of it. So I had to think for over 24 hours and think about how I was going to approach it. And I actually told him, I said, the great mentor to me was your dad's cousin, your second cousin. And I said, I'm going to handle this in the way that if he were alive, he would have told me he thought it should be handled. And that's how I'm approaching this. And he said, I appreciate that. And I was as diplomatic as could be. So here, I pulled it up here. The state made a restitution request and served him with it. And here I'm laughing as I say it. They paid a deputy wages to testify at the trial, the underlying trial he wouldn't convict on. And they want $127.65 for that. And then this next one is the total amount paid for each juror and they've written it in by hand. But for each juror for their reimbursement of mileage and appearance, and they want $1,050.92 for that. Like, we weren't successful in this jury trial. You've got to pay us for the people that testified and for the jurors.
They're asking that from the juror who
refused to convict.
I mean, it would only get better if they were asking that from the plaintiff of the original case, or from the defendant of the original case.
No, they couldn't. The guy got acquitted. He's free to go.
Well,
they're going after the juror who refused to convict him.
It would seem to me, yeah. Well, also talking about blanket immunities, it would seem to me that the jurors have the strongest immunity of them all.
This got into, and it's funny it's interesting you point that out. Without going chapter and verse through all the law here, the whole law around, I'm calling back jurors in, and this juror is going to testify that he did it and do that. That intersects with a whole area of law where they're like inviolable. So it's interesting you should say that there was a hierarchy of problems you could go down with from the state's case from that perspective. And going back and talking to these jurors and having a juror testify and refuse to convict. I mean, this is so problematic. I mean, problematic on so many levels, but they were just real mad about it. It shows what can kind of happen in outstate Minnesota. I mean, I have to tell you, and you know, there's a lot of different things that can happen in court. I mean, people get ingrained in areas and what their customs are and how they think things should go. And then they don't, when they don't go that way, they get real upset about it. And they, exercise their, whatever powers they have against people, or at least they think that they have. Do you guys keep this right at an hour?
We do, and we are.
No, we can keep going. I mean, usually when we have somebody on, like we'll go for 2 hours. But I mean, if you got to run, Nathan, this has been fascinating. I've loved this conversation. I don't know, Lucas. I could personally stick around for a little bit longer.
Oh, likewise. I've got another hour, as long as you want, Nathan. I'm loving this, and
well, just a little bit longer. I don't think I have too much more. I think I packed in the stuff that I kind of wanted to pack in, unless you guys had specific question. Otherwise, I want to make a pitch. I'm running for judge. And I'm trying to raise money for it. I can't. Nobody can tell me that they're contributing. Let me talk. Could I talk quickly about judicial elections?
Yeah, let's talk about judicial elections.
I want to talk about judicial elections because this is an interesting area, and I just went to a CLE on it. And I'm running for judge, and HansenForJudge.com with the number 4, and Hansen is the EN version. So if you're a rich person that has money, I think that you have to be an individual and not a company, and you can give me up to $2,500. You can't tell me that you contributed. I'm not supposed to know who contributed. I have.
Oh wait, you mean we can't just send you $1 million in Bitcoin? That doesn't violate federal election commission.
You can't do that. This is state law. There's rules about which is about what I'm going to get into. Which there was in Minnesota. In Minnesota, we were not. We have elections, technically judicial elections, but we rarely. And judges are elected every 6 years. They serve 6-year terms, and we have when incumbents are on the ballot, incumbent is next to their name, and it's on the back side of the ballot. And I think that that's a statute should be changed, but that's in Minnesota statute. They're the incumbent goes on the ballot, and there were all kinds of restrictions on judicial candidates in Minnesota up until around 2002. And then this guy named Greg Wurzel, who if I met him, I just met him tangentially. I know people who know him, and he ran for state Supreme Court, and then he said that, well, I'm silenced and there's all these things I can't do. And they said they can't seek party endorsement. And and there were limitations on how you could raise money and so forth. And he litigated this party endorsement thing, and the Republican Party of Minnesota did somehow. He got them to be and didn't do him much good. If you look at the thing there, he lost. But he he litigated to allow party endorsements so that you could get the endorsement of a political party and run for the court. And this was litigated up to the Supreme Court. He litigated this up to the U.S. Supreme Court, and it ended up being a case Republican Party versus White. And then he had some companion cases of interpreting that later on. But in essence, they said that you can have these partisan elections in Minnesota. You can get a party endorsement. Now, Minnesota is a largely Democrat statewide. I mean, that's who prevails here. The utility of a Republican endorsement, aside from the fact that I think in 2018, Michelle McDonald ended up being like the highest vote getter, or was it 2016? It was one of these elections when she ran for Supreme Court. It was somebody. She's been involved in judicial elections. She's not a friend of mine. She's been my opponent. I litigated with her. I represented Michael Broadcorb when she sued him for libel, and I won that on summary judgment and then at the Court of Appeals. But it's neither here nor there. I don't have any particular beef with her. She ran and was the highest vote getter, like more than the governor, like in 2018. And I think she got the party endorsement. So people are interested in judicial elections. But then there's some places where I think it might be useful. And I think the rationale for it, people say, well, why get a party, why get a party endorsement? I mean, does that show that you're not, that you're a partisan person? Well, my perspective on it is that it's a lot of these people who get appointed, not every single one of them, but a lot of these people appointed, they come from political backgrounds. Let's look at the state court judge in Carson v. Simon.
Are we talking about when the governor appoints somebody?
Yeah, the governor can appoint. There's 6-year terms, and if somebody doesn't retire at the right time, so there's an open seat, then it gets filled, and then that person has to stand for election. So the seat that I'm running for was held by a guy named Tad Jude, who was a former Democrat and then became Republican, somebody I've known for a long, long time. I think I first met him when I was 12 years old at a parade. And he turned 70, so he had to retire, and then Walz filled his seat. And then so I'm running for his seat because she has to stand for election now. She has to stand for election now, and so I'm running for her. And I'm not saying, making any accusation she's partisan. I'm speaking in general, that the person that we had in the trial court in the Carson v. Simon case, I mean, she had worked for Amy Klobuchar. She was a political worker for Amy Klobuchar. I think if you look into the background of many of these people, not all, you do have people who are, it would appear to be political appointees, and I'm not going to point in particular. And so my view generally of the party endorsement, I mean, is, first of all, I believe in giving it, and not why I'm running, but I just want to say generally, I believe in giving everybody a fair shake, no matter who they are, and I'm skeptical of the government, but I also know that there's things that the government just has to do because you have to have a civilization. And what's happened is in my district is largely, you would call it a red district. I mean, if you were, I don't have it. It's probably +5, +10 Republicans, something like that. All these counties, and so every judge from that county has been appointed by a Democrat, just about, almost, for the last 12 years. So the people who live in those counties, the majority of them are Republicans, and they don't have anybody who's been picked by a Republican. And from my perspective, if we have the judicial elections, the people should be allowed to endorse the kind of person, somebody that they want, and
And
have the
just to
opportunity to vote for them.
Yeah, just to set that up, like you mentioned it kind of briefly, and that's this state has largely been, on any statewide level, has been Democratic for a really long time. So when we say, all these appointees, because the governor appoints, and so we haven't had a Republican governor since a really long time ago.
It's been 12 years. I think Tim Pawlenty was the last one. And I think a lot of people would say Tim Pawlenty appointed a lot of Democrats. There is a Judicial Selection Commission, but I want to be careful. I got to be careful about what I say about things. But it's ultimately, it's a person from a political party that makes the appointment. I mean, that's who makes the ultimate decision. What the partisanship of that, I guess you'd have to look at it on a case by case basis, or come away with your own assessment about it. But I just think that I don't think that there's anything wrong with running a partisan race. I don't think it makes you unfair to anybody like that, or anything like that. I think that a lot of people, frankly, a lot of these people, what kind of irritates me is, I like to be kind of straightforward with people. And a lot of these people, I would say, I went to that are around this or have knowledge of this, they'll kind of, and I want to be very careful about not naming anybody. They'll have this view of, like, well, there was picked by the governor and his commission, and this is not a political person. This is a very good person. And in some cases, in many cases, they might be. But I think you're going to see here on the state Supreme Court side that I know one of the persons has a challenger, the Carl Procaccini, who was Governor Walz's general counsel, who was actually in a jury pool of mine when he worked at Green Espel. I had a criminal jury trial in Hennepin County, and Carl Procaccini, who's now on the state Supreme Court, was in my jury pool. He didn't end up being on the jury, but he was in the pool. And so he has raised, I believe, $100,000 very quickly for his race. And I've heard reliably that a lot more money, I'm not going to give a number on it, is being raised for him. So in $2,500 increments, you have to ask yourself the question, and I guess the cynical answer would be, look at the list of donors, because they do get published when there's reports. I don't know if the reports have been published yet, but who you would have to ask yourself for this seat, who is this person who is the governor's general counsel that can raise $100,000 and probably multiples of that after that among groups of people for their election? If it's in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, what network of people is that? I mean, I don't know. I don't know the answer to it. If I were to pure speculation, it would be some sort of partisan network of people. That there would be some group of partisan activists connected with the political party that from which he came from that would provide that money to him. I don't know. I don't know that for sure. I'm not. But I guess I'd have to look at the list, which something I've been meaning to do. I got some other stuff to do just to see if I recognize the names. But to say that, well, we have nonpartisan races here and that's not partisan, I would say the ability to raise that kind of money that quickly, it looks like it might come from people who are partisan people. But maybe not. Maybe there is just all this big, professional group of people that want to keep the incumbents. I don't know. I'd have to take a look at it, but it certainly looks like something that might be political people. So I think that the people pretending, the idea of pretending that you don't have these proclivities or biases in your life after a certain time of living is, I think that people are BSing people to say
It's
that.
disingenuous.
It's disingenuous. So I think that the key to the whole thing, if you're going to be a fair person, is to be like, all right, I have these views of things and I have these views of all kinds of things, and to recognize these things and to set them aside and do everything you can to be fair for the greater good. And to try to treat people real fairly. I think that that's what it's about. I think it's having the maturity to admit that, say, yeah, I have all kinds of political views about all kinds of things. Am I going to let that interfere with something I've got to do? No, it's not. And I mean, I've learned that from years of litigating. I mean, there's things that, that come to me, I might not necessarily like or agree with or whatever. But if I've got a job to do within the realm of legitimacy, I'm going to do the job. That's what I have to do. That's my job. I think to say, well, we're just not biased at all. We don't have any we don't have any views at all whatsoever. Well, sure you do. It is. There's several judicial races going on in Minnesota. I think I'm the only one where I'm seeking the Republican endorsement. I'm working on it now. My judicial district cuts across CD's congressional districts. So I have a judicial district 10, which is all those counties. I learned this morning it cuts across more congressional districts than I thought. I need those MNGOP congressional districts to send a convention call, to have a convention to endorse me. But mine goes down to congressional district 2, congressional district 4, or congressional districts 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 8.
Wow.
So six of the 8 congressional districts in Minnesota include my district.
That's got to be the only one that does that.
Yeah, I'm the only. Well, I'm the only one seeking an endorsement. Because I think that I have my reasons. I've thought it through, and I think it's a way. That I can win it. I think that if I did absolutely nothing to run, I would come pretty close. I think that if I get activists who believe in me and that I can win, the seat. I'm running to win the seat. And there are some other judicial elections. I mean, there's the Supreme Court ones, there's the Procaccini one, and I think some other guy in outstate Minnesota. I don't know. There's a couple different people challenging incumbents.
So
Some
with this,
I know, some I don't.
so with the party endorsement, so you'd actually so the annotations that would be on the ballot, one would say incumbent, and then what it would say.
No, it's not. It's not on the ballot. The benefit is, and I can't coordinate with them, so I have to be careful. But this is the hope. The hope is if there's party units, we call them BPOUs here, basic political operating units, or the party itself, if they send out a sample ballot to their list of people, of activists, of delegates, of known voters, and say, vote for this candidate and vote for Nathan Hansen for judge, he's endorsed.
I see.
If that is the great benefit to the endorsement, then my hope is, I can't coordinate with it, my hope is that somebody out there in the various multiple entities that could do it would send out a sample ballot. I think that's and then also if I'm endorsed, I get the party lists. So these lists that the Republican Party has, I have access to that.
Lucas, where you're at, do they have judicial elections? Is this the same thing in your neck of the woods? Do you elect judges, or are they all appointed? How do you know how it works?
Well, I'm all over, but in most places that I'm at, like judges are elected, and maybe that's because most of these are Western states. Uh,
Mostly what I see when I see judicial elections, and this is still just Minnesota, I just usually see people running unopposed as incumbent, and that's all there is. It's very
well,
rare.
absolutely, absolutely, and um, I mean, whether it be Texas, Colorado, New Mexico, or Oklahoma, most uh, even when it comes to the judicial elections, most of them are unopposed, or most people are unaware of. I mean, Nathan, obviously, when we get to questions of law, uh, this it's hard to get down to what are, if you're applying the rules, the statutory rules, and that's what most conversations, whenever you get to a judge running for office, is I don't know, we've buried these notions of morality, what motivates the candidates, and I think it's you have been more forthcoming than probably maybe any judge that I've ever heard. So I appreciate that. But it's really hard to draw out the candidates as to what what
Well,
motivates them.
yeah, and there's tremendous power in like what judges are capable of doing. So, I think that this has been recognized by governors and by, various people that say, hey, like the judges have power to sort of, sway over how the country actually operates, as well as sheriffs. These things they hold quite a bit of power. And as Nathan pointed out, the prosecutors too. I mean, they can just bring up charges and they're immune. They've got this armor on. I mean, it's like there are these like hidden little centers of power that exist in our system of governance and government that really need to be recognized. And I think that I'm excited for the fact that Nathan, who's expressed interests in fairness, that's what we need. We need people who are going to do fair things, not do partisan things. Like, if you're seeking a political endorsement, fine and well and good, but the intention of trying to do the job well and do it without the lens of, hey, I'm going to try to stick it to this particular group. That's really important.
Absolutely, and like since the Johnson era, we have the Johnson Amendment that is it. I don't mean to bring up more touchy subjects, especially when we're close to the hour. But my grandfather was a sheriff in Colorado in the 60s, maybe the 50s, no, the 60s. And I asked him years ago, I said, when you decided to run for sheriff, what did you do? And he just looked at me matter of factly and said, well, I went to the Baptist preacher and the Methodist preacher and the Catholic priest. And with, had a conversation with them as to whether I would be supported by them or not. And when I had the support of those congregations, that was 85-90% of my constituency, and that was it. And it's interesting to me that we've come to a time in which we talk about the problems of money in elections, of partisanship versus um, talking about the morals, or this narrative that our legal system is not political, and I think that we're coming to a time whenever we have to own up to the fact that it is they are political positions, and that the morals that make up the decisions. There's a lot more than just applying the letter of the law, so to speak. So, Nathan, I really I don't know if you have anything more that you want to talk about, but
No, not really. And I appreciate the time to go on something like this. I don't know how it is. It's good to it's good practice. And then you seem like a good group of guys. I have a business call at 11:30. So I got to call somebody about something. And yeah, I appreciate you having me on. This is good kind of warm up for It's nice to get into this extensive topic of things. And when I look back on a lot of these things, I think it's kind of amazing that all these things happen. And there's other things I've done too. I guess in a lot of ways, even though I haven't gotten rich at it, I've been kind of fortunate to be able to do all of these things. It's a wide view, but at times it's been very terrifying, and at times it's been rewarding. It's cool to be able to, kind of look back after 20 years went by real quickly.
I agree, Nathan. It's like sometimes I look back on my career and I think about some of the times where I've had these opportunities to do different things, take that corporate job or this corporate job. But, oftentimes I've taken this harder road doing startup companies and doing really out there kind of stuff. And, I look back on my life and I could have made more money, but I have no regrets on the things that I've had the opportunities to do. So I think it's a life well lived. If you look back on it and you say, wow, I got to do cool stuff. That's great.
And I know a lot of great lawyers, but I know very few who have been able to kind of do a lot of what they want to do, the type of things they want to do, and try out this other stuff and kind of push the envelope on things in a legitimate way. Not be a crackpot and jeopardize your license or anything like that, but to legitimately, take a new look at things and do what you can for your clients and do what you think is the right thing to do.
Well, I know whenever I'm looking for somebody and I'm seeking a referral, you're one of the first people I ever call. So, but happy to still call you a friend, and I'm glad we've had a chance to stay in touch over the years. And hey, I'm going to ask you one thing. We have really wanted to talk to somebody from the Kennedy campaign, and it sounds like you've got his number in your direct Rolodex. Can you send him a text message and let him know we want to talk to him?
I haven't texted him for a lot of years. I don't know if I didn't call him back. I just thought this is a level of person that I don't just text with.
It's up to you. I mean, if you can, we'd love to have a chat with him. We've been kind of a fan of what he's been doing. So
Nathan, I bet he has an unlimited texting plan, so he probably won't.
I probably won't tie up his texting. I think I did text with him a little bit. I thought it was strange. I mean, in my phone, it literally says RFK Jr. You know what I do have? I do have his private Gmail, and I can share that with Grant. That would probably be more useful.
Yes,
I do have his private Gmail account. I'll share that with Grant, and you guys can do with that what you will. I mean, maybe you can, get him on for a little bit or whatever.
I'll shoot him a note. I'll tell him we're a big fan and we'd love to have a conversation with him because we're watching what's going on as far as, especially with his being excluded from the CNN debate. So
like I said, the man and private on one-to-one talking to him. I mean, just having a one-on-one conversation, lawyer to lawyer with him. I've talked to a lot of lawyers over the years. This is a smart guy. The really smart guy, and I know he had his problems in life and stuff early on, but this is not somebody who got these law things because because of his name. I mean, maybe some stuff came to him because of his name, but the merit of his intelligence, he's a very good, very strong lawyer. I mean,
he's won a lot of cases.
I was very impressed by his league, and I know I can kind of tell when I talk to people, and he wasn't any BS at all. I mean,
well, and it's
a real deal.
Yeah, and his look at Julian Assange and his response to while everybody else was either lauding themselves, patting their backs, or having a negative reaction to Julian Assange. I love that Bobby Kennedy said he pled guilty and should never have, like, his grasp of the law and the I guess the moral certitude, the political moral certitude, in that he fires from that cylinder has really impressed me. I think we have missed that in candidates for quite some time. So I've been hella impressed with Bobby Kennedy, and I was skeptical at first, but he's won me over. Anywho.
Well, it was good talking to you guys. I really appreciate it. If you know anybody that can donate money, send it to my campaign. I don't need a ton of money. I just need to get some basic stuff together. And then that's just some signs and some walking cards. I'm going to spend my own money too. It's obviously a job I'm trying to get. So it's not other people's responsibility, but spread the word. I appreciate it.
Well, best of luck. And I've really enjoyed the conversation. There's all these podcasts and media out there now, Nathan, too. So if I'd say embrace it as much as possible. It's good exposure.
Yeah. Thank you so much, you guys, and take it easy. Have a good day.
Thanks a lot, Nathan.
Yep. Bye.
All right, Grant, a good one. I really